Um, if I just introduce the purpose of today, of what we've tried to do, this is actually something, an idea that my colleague Nicola had, and then she and I were talking about it together and it's sort of evolved. We want to look at the future of the nuclear field, and we wanted to set up a roundtable event where we could talk about sort of how we foresee the pressing issues for the future in view of the Ukraine war and the events of the Ukraine war. But we wanted to be able to have a forum for early career researchers, and in particular mid-career researchers, to look at, you know, what's the direction of funding, what's the direction of the debates within the field. And we wanted to consult with you all, as you are experts within the field and you have an excellent record of research, to share your views on how you see the nuclear arguments, the nuclear debates developing as we go forwards. So that's sort of the context for what we have today. We've got roughly an hour per roundtable, so it's not very long. And we've given you 3 questions as prompts. So it's about 20 minutes per question, but the way I'm thinking is that often the discussions, the questions flow into each other. So it's very informal, and it's sort of just to sort of, the questions are prompts really to develop the discussions as we go along. I will sort of, I tend to, my chairing style is that I do tend to sort of be a bit sort of strict with time, and I might interrupt, and I don't mean any offense if I do, but it's just to make sure that we've got enough time for the next sessions and that things sort of roll along. If anyone has any queries, they can always put some questions in the chat, or as I say, it's an informal environment. We will try and have a bit of time for Q&A somewhere along the lines. If we can do that within the roundtable, that's great, but we've got a break fitted in, and we've also got time at the end. So it might be that participants might have some observations that they want to raise. I will try and allow sort of 5 minutes at least at the end of the roundtable, just if anyone has anything that they want to raise. And again, if they pop some queries in the chat, then if we can't get to everything in the roundtable, then hopefully you can still, anyone that's here that isn't isn't a participant, you know, if you have any queries, then you can raise those. Okay, one other thing I want to mention is that Nicola and I are very mindful of trying to create a gender balance with this. And it's been a real struggle for various reasons. So we're mindful that this first roundtable doesn't have quite as good a balance as the second roundtable, and we sort of want to just predicate that we're aware of that and that we're committed to EDI. And I know some of our participants have been really supportive and have got some good ideas as to how we can try and address that. So just to sort of let you know that it wasn't for lack of trying, but I think it's symptomatic of the challenges that we face within the field. So just to let everyone know that. Okay, so I will stop talking and I will hand over to my colleagues now. If I just very quickly introduce who is here. Because of time, I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to say the names and where you're from. And again, I apologize for my pronunciation. So if we start, we're joined by Professor Malfrid Brout-Heghammer, who is Professor of Political Science and Founding Director of the Oslo Nuclear Project at the University of Oslo. Hi, Malfrid. Thank you. We've got Mikhail Smetana, Associate Professor, Faculty of Social Sciences, Charles University, and Coordinator of the Peace Research Centre in Prague. So, hi. We've got Dr. Cameron Hunter, who is a Ritual Deterrence Project at the Department of Political Science in, oh, my pronunciation's here, Copenhagen's University, Denmark. Again, I hope I've pronounced that right. We have Professor Benoit Pelopidas, who is Founding Director of the Nuclear Knowledges Programme at Sciences Po in France. Hi, Benoit. Dr. Stephen Herzog, a Senior Researcher for the Centre of Security Studies in Zurich. Hi, Stephen. Andrew Footer, Professor of International Relations at the University of Leicester. Hi. And Olamide Samuel from the European Leadership Network in the UK. So thank you all of you for coming along. If I sort of hand over to you and start with the first question as a prompt. For early and mid-career researchers based in Europe, what are the necessary topics for the future for our study of nuclear weapons? So it's a big question to start off with. So does anyone want to share any thoughts or any experiences? Oh, Malfred has raised your hand. Hi, Malfred.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. So I wanted to be to contribute some thoughts on this important question from the perspective of having spent both time in the United States and back here in Europe and in Norway. It seems to me that there's enormous demand for really the fundamentals, and that in my project, there's funding from both the Norwegian government as well as from US-based foundations. And I do think that in Europe, in many European countries, there is increasing funding from governments. I think we see this in Norway, Sweden, Germany, for example. I'm sure there are numerous other examples as well. And that this reflects a real hunger, a real thirst for knowledge about nuclear weapons and security writ large. It seems to me that in many countries there is this post-Cold War gap that I think many have talked about and reflected on, but now this gap has become quite obvious, and it seems to me that we are about to face many challenges that we've perhaps not faced in many decades. Nuclear testing, conflicts involving nuclear threats, that will require a lot of fundamental research. And it seems to me that it's almost difficult for me to sort of single out one or two questions. It really appears to me that there's a real need for fundamental insights and knowledge, and perhaps also to make sure that we have an understanding of how various states see nuclear weapons, their potential role in security and defense, their impact in conflicts, as this field has been dominated by US-based scholars and institutions. I think that's about to change. And I think that's one area where I am very hopeful that we'll see a lot of important work moving forward is precisely how do various nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states see this nuclear age that we're entering and the dangers that we are facing. So that's one attempt to talk a little bit about how I see some of these challenges, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of thoughtful insights from others here. So I'll stop there for now. And thanks again for convening this meeting.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Malfred. Okay, so I saw the hands, but unfortunately I didn't see the order. I saw Benoit, and then was it Andrew and Michael? Was it? Does that sound okay? Okay, so Benoit.
To be fair, I think Drew's hand was up before me.
Drew, were you first? I'm sorry, I didn't see. I just got the three names popped up, and the one at the top was Benoit. Drew, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, I will do. Although it's always easier following Benoit because I can just basically say I agree with what he said. But it's I think just following on from Malfred's really good introduction. I think it's not. The question you posed was about what are the necessary topics. I think there are loads of necessary topics. I don't think there's one in particular. And I think the key question is really to encourage people to do things that interest them. That's how you get good answers. That's how you get different viewpoints. That's how you move things forward. So I think there's always a risk that we focus on the latest thing and sort of all do that. But actually, there's a load of different ways that you can do this. And it is kind of this, as much as possible, doing things that interest you. That said, one thing that I increasingly feel is part of this field and is a worry to me is the fact that the room for discussion between two very different viewpoints of our nuclear world is narrowing and perhaps is increasingly not existing. So you have one set of people which, for perfectly legitimate reasons, believe in the deterrent value of nuclear weapons, and one set of people that really don't. Both have equally valid claims. My concern is that over the recent past, we're moving in a direction where these two communities don't speak to each other, speak to themselves, and to some extent even demonize each other, I think is something that's begun to happen. So I don't know if this is an academic question, it's more of a practical question, but it's the importance of organizations and groups like this that allow people with different views to be in the same room.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks. So then we move on to Benoit and then Hal.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Malfred and Drew. So I'll say three kind of types of things very briefly. One is simply about the nature of the field. You know, I want to kind of quote Lawrence Friedman and Jeffrey Michaels, who noticed that this field goes in cycles. So, you know, every 3 decades, we're like, oh, it's completely new. We need to reinvent ourselves, la, 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 la. And then we actually replay the same games. So following from what Drew said, we need to not fall in love with ourselves in that way and really look seriously into missed opportunities in the past. The second, including missed analytical opportunities. The second order of observations is about the conditions of possibilities of knowledge production in the field. And one thing is, as you've heard me say repeatedly, the funding question is crucial. I think Malfred is right that there is an increasing amount of funding available for those things, but there is an increasing amount of funding that carries massive conflicts of interest. And it has been established in all sorts of other realms of socio-political activities that research funded by conflicts of interest, by funders that carry conflicts of interest, introduce biases through different mechanisms. In the nuclear weapons policy field, we've acted so far as though that doesn't apply to us without actually asking the question. Shelv and I have started asking the question in a piece called No Such Thing as a Free Donation, and we found that it does apply to us. So it's crucial that we avoid doing research based on funders that carry a very direct conflict of interest. And second, one thing that, you know, esteemed subsets of the scholarship have done, that we don't carry or we don't naturalize the categories of particular actors as if they were neutral analytical categories. And since, you know, a lot of you are based in the UK, the one category that comes to mind is calling, you know, nuclear weapons, calling them the deterrents. That's what I mean when I say naturalizing actors' categories. A third kind of type of observation, there has been a lot of discovery in environmental sciences, in particular about planetary boundaries, what Bruno Latour would call Gaia politics. And I think a lot of the field of nuclear weapons policy analysis is still, including our own, I'm not blaming anyone, is still operating with a pre-Anthropocene geopolitics. There are a few exceptions, but it's crucial, I think, to incorporate what we've discovered about what Latour calls the critical zones, that is the conditions of survivability of humanity in our scholarship. And that would be the point on which I want to finish. Let's not assume, that's what I've called the survivability bias. Let's not assume that either the communities we like or the political forms that we like will survive, but let's look at their conditions of survival, keeping in mind that there is a gap between our nuclear vulnerability and our understanding of it. So to me, one of the key things that scholars can and should do, because we're uniquely placed to do it, is fill that gap. Help us understand the scope of our nuclear vulnerability and why we either minimize it or miss it.
That's excellent. That's brilliant. That's given us loads of food for thought there. Brilliant. Thank you. Stephen, I've just seen your hands up, so I will come to you after Michal. How am I saying your name right? Have I got that wrong?
Yeah, you got it just
right. Oh,
no.
Lovely. Okay, so would you like to fire away and then we'll move on to Stephen? Okay,
hello everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great conversation. First of all, I would like to attest to what Malfred said about the funding. We have been living through a grant year this year, and we had a lot of discussion with the different grant agencies within my country, but also beyond. And it seems that what seemed to be like unfundable topics, just a few years back, suddenly seem to be way more interesting for funding agency, policymakers, reviewers, etc. So, I mean, in a way, we are not happy about the conditions how this happened, but we are happy about the fact that this is obviously happening. About the topics, yeah, I mean, there's a wide range of topics to study. That's definitely true. Even some of them that seem not to be that relevant, again, a few years back. They see a lot of interest in studying change, what happened in Europe after the invasion, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. That means, how this impacted, norms, institutions, practices that are connected with nuclear weapons, and, what it meant. So obviously, this is not new what I'm saying. A bunch of people in this group are actually doing that. So there's a lot of relevant and very exciting research, but I still think this is like an area that is exciting, both academically, but also policy-wise. And I would also like to somehow link what I'm going to say to what Andrew said about the two camps, right? And I mean, like all these debates in nuclear scholarship have always been somehow defined with these two camps, against each other, right? And in different directions. I don't know if you guys remember this famous forum, what we talk about when we talk about nuclear weapons a few years back. At the time, there was a lot of discussion about political sciences and historians not talking to each other much, and there's a gap in this, or like some rift in this research, and that maybe it would be useful to somehow bridge the gap, and try to find what the other group has to say, which is still relevant. Maybe the camps are also different, right? I mean, Andrew, you spoke about the pro-deterrence and pro-disarmament camp. That might be definitely true. From my perspective, also, Europe is very strong in interpretativist research comparing to US, in a lot of research that is problematizing, for example, some practices that we take for granted, which I think is like a big strength. At the same time, a lot of people in Europe are also, more in this US camp of, let's say more analytical, statistical. And I somehow believe that the conversation between these camps can be enriching. It can lead us to something new, which is always important for me. So I will stop there and look forward to what Stephen has to say.
Thank you, brilliant. So Stephen, if I hand over to you.
Yeah. I'll just be really quick, and that is that pretty much every conversation that I have had with funders related to what they're interested in, both in Europe and the United States and Asia-based funders, unsurprisingly, has been focused on emerging technology recently and how will those things change the nuclear age. And I think that people who are interested in thinking that the nuclear world is the same old world when classical deterrence theory came about in the 50s, 60s, et cetera, are sadly mistaken. And it's quite fascinating that most of the theory that we use to think about the world of nuclear deterrence was designed really during this kind of narrow 15 to 20 year period, and it hasn't evolved much more than that. So we have, right, a new situation where we have more actors than we've ever had before, not ever, but who, look, the deterrence theory is generally based on, right, the model of bipolarity between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we don't know exactly how that applies to new actors, and we don't know how that applies to new technologies, whether that's artificial intelligence, neural networks, machine learning, additive manufacturing, et cetera. And I think that all of these developments, whether you are on one side of the house and you want a more robust nuclear arsenal and deterrence, or whether you're on the other side of the house and you want disarmament, are going to have massive implications. They're going to have massive implications for deterrence. They're going to have massive implications for arms control, dealing with dual use technologies, which have significant commercial ramifications and uses. They're going to have massive implications for non-proliferation, and they're going to have massive implications for disarmament. So, I know everyone is beginning to incorporate this into their curriculum, but that does seem to be the future direction for funders of all persuasions as far as where we're going.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. That's excellent. Okay, Cameron, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, everyone, and thanks to the organisers for putting this together. Promises to be a great day. So picking up on a few of the previous speakers' points, I think around kind of like the basic questions that maybe we're not looking at, or basic information. And I think some of Benoit's points about kind of what can be done, and the kind of the limitations on the funding side of things. That I think the data that I most want to get access to in my career is probably more around anthropological data and information about practices within the nuclear deterrence kind of systems. So in contrast to, I think Stephen is correct to talk about how, you know, this emerging and disruptive technology narrative is really what the kind of most of the sort of policy space is occupied with at the moment. When I try and put my own work in conversation with science and technology studies stuff, science and technology studies have recognized that getting preoccupied by the new and innovation means that you're being distracted from kind of practices of maintenance and reproduction that take place in the background. The trouble is, if we want to look at, you know, what are the human practices involved in maintaining these things, what are the kind of pitfalls or economic activities that take place within the nuclear enterprise itself, you need access. And with that access comes the kind of pitfalls that Benoit is talking about. And I'm not really sure exactly how we would go about understanding more on a kind of basic empirical level about what's going on without getting entangled in the kind of political structures that, as academics, I think we should be, you know, we should have some kind of critical distance to. So yeah, looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Fantastic, great. Apologies, there's a delay. I've got a sticky mouse, so it takes me a few minutes to unmute each time. So Benoit, would you like to counter that? And then I think if it's okay with everyone, we'll move on to the next point because we sort of rolling things on. We've done about 20 minutes. So Benoit, would you like to respond?
Sure, yeah, very briefly, because I think Cameron is getting us to the challenge, right? And so I want to simply address that with good news, which is, you know, you sounded like this is an intractable dilemma, and so we have to accept the access and the constraint that come with it, otherwise we're stuck. And so there are instances in which actually not accepting the access, but producing the methodology to change the scope of the question has worked. And I'm thinking of two things. For instance, the work of Julien de Trouillot and Sébastien Philippe to be able to track radioactive particles in the air, and therefore to be able to independently reassess the effects of nuclear testing, the work they did on nuclear testing in Polynesia. I'm sorry if this is coming out of my own team, but it turns out that's the case. And Julien is not part of the team, so I want to give credit to Julien as well. But see, that's a way that says, look, we can reopen the effects of testing conversation without asking for data, but by saying we've created a methodology to produce and to legitimize particular types of data. Similarly, on the question of luck, the fact that a lot of the field assumes that unwanted nuclear explosions should be credited as successes of deterrence. And it turns out analytically, we should be able to say some of them should, but others should be credited to luck. And if so, how do we account for the world that could have happened with the same people and the same practices? Precisely by modeling the effects of those explosions. And in doing that, you actually validate new types of data. So that's a way of circumventing the obstacle that you're pointing to, Cameron.
That's brilliant, great, thank you very much. So we've kicked things off with some really good. I think we're going to come back to some of the points that you've raised again when we're coming through these other questions, because I think they're pertinent to the overall picture and the overall topic. So if we move on to the second question, and hopefully a little bit sort of with a positive slant on things, but how has the field improved in the last 10 years? And again, where do you see it going? I think is going to link in with what we've already discussed. So if I hand that over to you, how has the field improved? Great. Stephen, do you want to fire away?
I will start with a positive note and then quickly we'll descend to the negative. The field has improved in the past few years with an increased focus, I think, on bringing in diverse voices. And I think part of the racial reckoning that we saw in different countries really helped with that. And we have a lot of different groups focused on diversity. I know that the organizers faced trouble with this panel and getting female participants, and I frequently hear that story. I will just personally say that if you have heard the line, the future is female, I think that we can do a lot better than a panel where we have 7 substantive speakers on nuclear weapons. 6 of them are men, and that is an 85.7%, I think, male panel. And I think that the fact that we are here is really interesting because BISA's own numbers say that 40% of people in the field are women, and then we wind up with a panel which is 86% men. You're shaking your head, so maybe 40% is high. But
no, I'm shaking my head in agreement with you.
Yeah.
I sort of shouldn't shake my head. Sorry, I'm sympathizing.
No, but I think that this represents a collective failure on the part of us as panelists and men, and that includes me. And I sat there looking at the panel in its original construction, knowing that I had a few colleagues that dropped off, and I sat there thinking, this isn't balanced, I don't feel comfortable, and I'm just going to sit back and surely someone will fix this. And you can always do that as a male. You say, someone else is going to fix this, all right? And then someone else never does fix it. And so you wind up in this situation. And so I also think, which is interesting, is panels are just one example. And I know men in this room who are here, how many times have you been part of forming a panel where there becomes a discussion with, how do we find a woman or a person of color to fill out this panel for the sake of optics? And I think it's really, sadly enough, is quite shameful. And I think none of it surprises me on some level that we wind up with 40% of women in the field, and then at like senior levels and discussions, it kind of filters off from there. I mean, like, think about, for example, how the field views and deals with pregnancy in academia, right? When women have children, they frequently stay home with the child. They fall behind as far as longevity of career with people who, employers who are not sympathetic. They may have tenure issues. And what happens to a man who, right, has a child? That man winds up probably staying home, getting out of teaching, writing another book, getting tenured sooner. And so I think it's really kind of problematic. And so, I don't have answers to all of these things. I try my best. I think that I, frequently fail on this front too, but we need to do a lot better, not just in terms of panels, working groups, who's getting grant funding, hiring, to actually, do that, to include women, not just for the sake of optics, to really substantively include women. And we all need to think about who we're citing as well too, which contributes to tenure and contributes to diversity of ideas. I sit back as a reader of scholarship and as a peer reviewer, and am frequently disappointed in my colleagues and what I read. International Studies Quarterly now requires, I think, 35% of citations to have women authors. I think that's a good start, and I think that others who are here, who are journal editors, really ought to consider how you could include this in. And it's one of these things, like if you're a man and you've written a paper on nuclear weapons and you start reading your paper and you don't see any citations to women, you really ought to think about that. Like, what does it mean that you are not interested in engaging with the ideas of women? I have fantastic female colleagues who write about everything from deterrence to disarmament and arms control in between, right? And I oftentimes then read papers that don't include any citations to this at all. And the last thing I'll say too is the field also has a problem when it comes to panels with the idea of the all-female panel. Organizers of conferences like to take groups of women working on things like emerging technologies and scoop them all together into one organized panel that they didn't organize and put them at like the 8 a.m. time slot so that men don't actually have to interact with women in their scholarship on issues. And women here probably know exactly what I'm talking about as far as that happens. I think it's shameful. I think we need to do better. And, I don't blame anyone in particular for this panel, but I do feel a little bit uncomfortable being here. And I think that if you feel uncomfortable being on this panel, listening to me as a male rant about being on this panel or something about that, we ought to just all, think about that a little bit more.
That's great, Stephen, thank you. Malfred, I have seen your hand. I just want to sort of chip in just a little bit there. I completely agree with you. I think that possibly we're seeing a cultural change, change in direction. I'd like to think so. A point I would also add to that is in terms of sort of the academic structure and the working environment, another thing that I've noticed is that when you're looking at interviewing candidates and bringing candidates into your teams, you find that the majority of women will have been active in EDI issues. So they will have taken on Athena Swan or other initiatives within their own universities. And then you find that less male colleagues have. And again, I think that's a bit of maybe a cultural change that takes time, but is something to be mindful of. So I'll hand over to Malfred.
Thank you so much, and thank you for raising these important points. And I think equally importantly, thinking about ways in which to address them. As a by now pretty old lady, I guess I would say that when I first started dipping into this field as a graduate student, things were much worse. Much worse. So while I think everyone here is committed to continuing to improve all the areas where we need improvements in terms of inclusion and diversity, I would say that, you know, there are good developments happening as well. I see in the chat that others are raising the issue of securing female speakers, and I wanted to just underscore that I'm aware at least of several senior and those emerging into sort of senior roles, you know, women in this field who are just overwhelmed with requests. And I think in all of those cases, people try to say yes to as much as possible, but at the end of the day, you only have so many hours. So that's one important dimension to this discussion about, you know, the responsibility of women to say yes, but also that we all have, you know, capacity limitations, and it is difficult. I think to ensure for those reasons the perfect balance that we're all striving for. I don't have amazing answers to that. I think in terms of recruitment into the field, things are looking much better and much healthier than they have been in the past. So I'm not assuming, though, that this means things will naturally somehow trickle up and change the field. I think that takes a lot of effort and you know, conscious effort on our part. And I really wanted to underscore Stephen's point about citations. I think this is so important, and with gender in mind as well. I think our US colleagues are really excellent at making sure that they cite each other and cite relevant work. And I think that's an area where Europe-based scholars can do a lot more and can do better in furthering important work, and also making sure that it's, you know, not biased in unhealthy ways. So I suppose it's a glass half full or half empty comment from me. I think another healthy development is that we see really strong and exciting communities here in Europe. And I think that also contributes to more kinds of insights coming into the mainstream of the field. So I think in that area, we're also seeing healthy developments that we should appreciate, I think, and continue to strive to strengthen. Thanks. Oh, one more thing. Pregnancy was mentioned. Come to Norway and do an academic career here. We have parental leave for everybody. So that's an excellent way to make sure that this is not an obstacle. So come over here and join us. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Malfred. Okay, so we've got Drew and then we have Benoit.
Thanks, Patricia. And just to take a slightly different take on this, I think one of the things I've noticed over the last 10 years is more people are interested, more students are interested in nuclear issues. You get, and maybe Nick Wheeler, who I think is on this call, someone would be better to speak about this than I do, given his far more experience, but there's more interest, and it is diverse interest as well. Particularly at Leicester, we have lots of different people that are interested in this stuff. So while this is by no means a solution to some of the problems that my other colleagues have mentioned, it is a positive thing. It is good that, you know, it's not classes full of white men, it's diverse classes. People are interested in this topic from lots of different backgrounds. And of course, the advantage of that is not always directly linked, but you have a diversity of opinions. And it goes back to my point before, you get different viewpoints, you get different understandings and experiences, different approaches to these things. So while it's not an immediate solution to some of the problems I understand we have in terms of in the field at the moment. The future, I think, is more positive as we go forward, or at least I hope it will be.
That's lovely. That's great. Yeah, that's a positive comment, and I think I agree with you. I see that reflection too. Benoit.
Yeah, so again, thinking about what new knowledge has the field brought in the last decade, I would, I guess, single out 4 lines of findings. The first one is really, and that's, I think, what I would encourage students to look at. In general, a broader discussion about what has the nuclearization of the world produced. And so one layer of answer to that question is testing and measuring the effects of nuclear testing. I mentioned Sebastian's work, but I'm thinking of Bo Jacobs's work, or in anthropology, the works of like Magda Stokowski's, or like Togjan Kasenova's recent book, to really adding this layer of effects on populations. But then, and I've talked about luck already, so I'll give that a break, even though I want to say to people who are in the UK that you have a massive analytical opportunity at looking at past cases of close calls in the UK and rethinking about them in terms of luck versus success of deterrence because of the availability of data about the UK. Third layer of effect of nuclearization, a discussion which was started long ago by Dan Dudney and Ellen Scarry, but which has been picked up and broadened by people like Thomas Fraisse on the effects of the nuclearization of the world on the possibility of democracy, and how nuclearization of the world produces modes of secrecy, but it also produces other things that modify the possibilities of democracy. And the fourth line of investigation that I want to simply tip my hat to is the progress in the modeling about nuclear winter, which really improves our understanding about the effects of possible future nuclear conflicts. And in all 4 of those, I think there is a continued stream of research to do in terms of what are the effects of the nuclearization of the world. One line of inquiry where I haven't seen much yet, and if I've missed it, please let me know, is whether nuclear weapons policies, for instance, create a premium on nuclear energy as an energy source. You know, the question is commonly asked the other way around.
Excellent. Thanks, Benoit. Michal.
Thank you. I don't want to talk too much about diversity. I mean, that's definitely not my expertise, even if we do have some, debates and experiences with that in our micro area of our work that is at our university. I always find these debates a little bit too focused on these outcomes, like, how many, people or how many women end up in panels, what's the proportion, and what we tried, and a little bit less on the, the sources of this problem. I mean, as a teacher lecturer at our university, my experience is that at the BA, MA level, and even PhD, there are actually a lot of women interested in these issues. There are a lot of interested women in these issues. They are on average really, maybe even better. If I was checking some of the grades, and on average, they were better than men. And then something happens beyond that, after that, after this period ends, because suddenly a lot of these students are simply not interested in continuing the career in academia. Again, I'm not saying this is the experience of all universities, but definitely in our case. And this is where the problem starts, because if at least at our department or in our institute, if you are women interested in these issues, trust me, you have billions of opportunities. You are basically wanted for every single grant, every panel, every proposal. I mean, you are just refusing a request to do. It's not a problem that you are overlooked. You are super wanted for all these things. For sometimes you are wanted for because your expertise, very often, there is also added value for all these proposals. So there's a lot of motivation to be included. The problem is, and this is where I think this is the core of this discrimination, is that for many of these women, simply the career academia, at least in our country, is definitely not attractive. So, I mean, the amount of women who are continuing is very low. That means, what we are trying to do is, rather than, measuring, if I have 5 or 6 women at the panel, we are trying to improve the conditions for them to actually engage, to be able to continue in the field. And this is, when we are interviewing women who decided not to continue, this is what they are actually, talking about. They are not complaining about not being included, in panels or, having opportunities. They actually had more opportunities they could have. It's just, the career in academia, at least in our country, I'm not saying it's everywhere, is really not attractive, for them, and for their choices that want to do. There's a lot of discrimination in terms of their, choices as a woman, which are different than as a man. So this is what we are trying to change. And of course, this is difficult because this requires a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of things that we cannot influence, like the governmental policies. I just wanted to highlight that these are the sources of these problems, at least again in my country. And I just want to comment, because we talk a lot about diversity, about the field and improvements, maybe from the methodological point of view, because this is again where I see some really positive developments. I just want to highlight that in the field where Stephen and I are working a lot when it comes to experiments and using surveys to study public elite attitudes. I see a lot of progress in terms of both quality of these experiments, methodological advancement, also the quality of samples. There's been a lot of development when it comes to use of open source tools for studying what's happening in the world. I think there has been a lot of great discoveries done by a lot of our colleagues, especially in the US, about studying what's going on in individual countries. That also made headlines in the main newspapers. And this is great. And I also see a lot of potential for, what we call broadly here, like digital humanities, like a lot of these, new tools to implement in interpretative research, to be able to suddenly study large amounts of data using these methods, but, being, having these methods being used a little bit different field than they are originally used, right? So this is, I think there's a lot of great potential for interpretive research to draw upon all these advances in, AI, these digital tools, to kind of improve it methodologically. And I saw some stuff recently from some colleagues who are working in this area, critical discourse analysis, using these new tools. I was extremely impressed about what they can do with that. So yeah, again, good news from my side.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we've got about 2 minutes left on this point. I know Olamide had a point and he's just had to leave. He's got to recharge the battery on his laptop. And Malfred, you had your hand up and I see you put your hand down. So I'm guessing you're nothing that you'd like to add. You're okay.
Just a thumbs up, that's all.
Oh, thumbs up. Oh, fantastic. Okay. So shall we maybe move on? And if Olamide can come back in, we can always just give him a few minutes just to come back to anything that he wanted to raise. I think there's some really positive points that have been raised there. Just to sort of recap very briefly, we've talked about new methodologies, we've talked about gender balance in the field, diversity, the importance of having diversity of opinions, and we've talked about the possibility of further focus on technology and AI and technological developments in the field. So I think there's some really interesting points that have been raised there. Thank you. We then move on to the last question, which is really aimed at sort of, again, early career, mid-career, but I think anyone with an interest in the field, is how can someone coming into the field or established in the field maximize their chances of major funding? We all know that funding is the issue that universities are looking for, that sort of is, we got funding, then we can do the things that we want to do. So any advice about how someone can maximize their chances of funding? And this is for sort of major funding bids. Drew, fire away.
Thanks, Patricia. Well, so I jotted down a few things. Hopefully this isn't going to take up too much time, but these are the things that I reckon are useful to think about. So firstly, look at what different funders want in terms of topics and deliverables, because they're not all the same. What you want to do might not fit every scheme. do something that you're passionate about and be able to sell the idea, particularly if it's something that involves an interview. Be led by the idea and construct the project around what you need to do to achieve this, not by specific outputs or by meeting a particular budget. Think through the mechanics of how the project will actually work. What will you be doing when, and does this look logical in terms of how it progresses? Think about the weaknesses and risks and how you might address them. How are you going to reassure funders that if something doesn't happen, that you'll still be able to complete the work? Don't overpromise. A well thought out project is better than the one that's not feasible. Get peer review from trusted friends and colleagues before, particularly if they've had success with funding from those funder groups. And I think the most important one, and I think this probably applies to quite a few people on this call, is keep trying. If the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth attempt at getting something funded doesn't work, it doesn't mean it's a bad project. It is just a bit of luck. So you just got to keep trying. You know, and hopefully you're successful if you stick at it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Anything that anyone else wants to raise? Any experiences that you've had, or any knowledge of any funders? Okay, I see Benoit, you've popped your hand up. So Benoit, do you want to step in? And then Michal.
I just want to, again, be the optimistic kind of person on this. And not about the state of the world, which is dire, not about the state of the field, which is barely less dire, but about the prospects for new knowledge. So I would really say, do not start with the requirements of the funders. Start with the intellectual consistency of the project. And in the nuclear field, you have massive analytical opportunities because of the gap between accepted wisdom and available evidence. Create the project that needs to be researched, and then you're going to sell your project to whoever wants to buy it. If you start building the project because of the requirements of the funders, then you get, you know, the cyclical layer of scholarship that we talked about in our grumpy moment earlier.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. I think that's a food for thought that we can come back to. That's great. Thank you. Okay, Michal.
Okay, it's not definitely the most important thing, but it's something I kind of wanted to highlight from a debate, both with the funders, but also with people who are trying to propose some projects and were unsuccessful. I kind of feel that, at least, you know, among the younger crowd that I'm talking to, there's a lot of fixation on outputs. I mean, specific, you know, promising specific number of deliverables, you know, number of articles, books. And there is a sense among many people that, you know, why they are failing is that they are just not promising enough. So they are trying to, you know, kind of overcome some, you know, other problems that they have in their proposal by, you know, promising more than others, you know, by promising a lot. And I feel that this is like a big mistake. First of all, you know, from debates with funders, very often this really matters very little, you know, to them, you know, about these promises. They are more interested in outcomes rather than outputs. By outcomes, I mean like this general, you know, what it adds to the knowledge of what we, you know, in our field, rather than, you know, specific outputs, which you can also very hardly control. You know, it's, you know, you can definitely promise 5 articles, but you have no idea, you know, if the one paper that you write, you know, will be rejected 5 times or 2 times, or, you know, immediately accepted, or if it will be, you know, in the peer review for 3 years. You know, these things are very hard to control, and, you know, of course, funders know that, but I feel like many people proposing these grants are just trying to I don't know, overpromise. And of course, you know, if they're actually successful and get a grant, you know, sometimes you're in this position that, you know, after getting the news about the grant, you're starting to freak out that you got it, because, you know, you promised so much that it will be very hard to deliver. You know? So it's always like this advice that you should, when you are writing a grant, you should imagine that you get it, and if you feel that you'll be happy about it, because sometimes you just, you know, promise so much that it will just burden you in a way that it's not really that attractive. So that would be one thing. And then another advice is also to be careful about very different policies of different agencies when it comes to project risks, because there's a huge difference between, on one hand, you know, ERC really wanting these, you know, high risk, high gain projects, you know, something that, you know, is kind of, frontier research, and also some national agencies actually going in a direction that is way more incremental, safer, and being much more careful about, and rejecting proposals that are potentially very promising but too wild, and these are two very different policies that might be there, and it's very important to consider which funder is which. So this would be like two lessons from this very busy grant year.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Stephen.
My cynical advice, Benoit and I were just talking about this in the chat, and I think it's true, is that if someone really wanted to get funded in the field and I had to tell them how to get funded, I would tell them to advocate for nuclear superiority of countries and building up stronger arsenals everywhere, because they would be loaded with funds and would never have any problem getting any money whatsoever. Absent that, I think there's a very cruel irony in the field that a lot of major funders happen to be leaving at a time when nuclear salience is growing, nuclear risks are growing, and there's increased interest, particularly among students, of getting into the field. And so, one thing that I've been doing is been trying to get creative and actually talk to private funders and corporations and others who are interested in funding things that kind of match their portfolio interest. But the other thing is I would say for people who are applying for grants, to be ambitious. And when I say to be ambitious, most of the funders that you talk to aren't interested in funding these types of grants for, sadly, £3,000, £5,000, £7,000, which are kind of small. And I know that, as PhD students, you are used to doing things on a shoestring and making it work and getting the research and maybe staying in youth hostels while doing elite interviews at a parliament somewhere and things like that. I just don't think that people are generally interested in that with funders. A lot of the funders I talk to aren't even dealing with things that are less than, 25,000, 50,000. And then at that point, sometimes hundreds of thousands. At that point, you need to kind of go with Drew's advice and probably just continuously apply. And, Francesca says it's so true what I said, and it's true. I bet that anyone who was an academic and went to Stratcom and their nuclear deterrence conference and went around saying they needed money to fund a giant project to enhance deterrence would have quite a big bankroll right now.
Brilliant. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Is there anything anyone wants to add? I think we've raised some big points. There's a bit of a division there. Oh, sorry, Benoit. Did you want to step in? No, you're okay. I think there's a bit of a division there. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, in the sense of imagining myself sort of starting out. There's a challenge there in that you might have a really passionate idea. You might have a really great idea, and you might have a really interesting novel methodology. But coming back to Drew's point about looking at what the funders are looking for, from my experience of funding and my colleagues' experience, if you put a bid in that doesn't meet what the funders are looking for, then it's rejected. So how do you convince the funders that your idea meets the thing that they're looking for? Benoit.
Again, thank you for asking the question, Patricia. But here I'm going to just second what Stephen said and bring back my point about conflicts of interest, which is we're in a world in which, funders who support massive production of nuclear weapons will have a lot of money to bring to academia to do, a sophisticated form of why what they want is inevitable, or to essentially do their public relations. So do you think it's the role of scholars to find a way to satisfy those funders? I don't think it is. And so the bottom line and the good news is, if you think about the last 4 decades of nuclear scholarship and what are like the most important discoveries, I would really emphasize the work on nuclear winter. And, what's the work of nuclear winter? It's literally 4 people. And the amount of funding that work required is very, very limited. So I think, again, I mean, I understand that early career people, to make a career, need to show the funding, but this is where getting closer to teams such as, you know, Michelle's team or mine or Malfred or Drew could help them as a step in the career. But prioritizing funding at any cost at a time when the funding scheme is going to be massively geared towards techno-optimism and nuclear weapons is, I think, very dangerous for the quality of the scholarship.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Malfred.
Thank you. I would love to hear what some of the other women here think about the diversity issue as well. So I hope that everyone feels welcome to contribute on this very important issue. I also want to push back a little bit. I think that there is a lot of negativity, I think, in some of the sort of comments made about funding, or perhaps I'm misunderstanding that, because funding is always difficult to get. And I think one of the perhaps good things about more European funders and more European actors providing funding is that there are more sources of funding to choose from and between. So I think that this opens up more opportunities. And I think looking at the Swedish case, for example, it seems like they're really investing a lot and are about to announce a lot of positions, or have announced a lot of PhD fellowship positions, which in my impression, there doesn't seem to be a lot of direction in terms of what themes and topics and so on. So I do think that things are, that there are a lot of opportunities there. And a very important question was raised earlier. So if what you want to do doesn't match what the funder asks for, then I think it's important to find another funder. I think it is very difficult to sort of present yourself as wanting to do something you don't want to do, whether it's on ethical, normative, or just your research interest grounds. And I do hope that with more funders in this field, there will be more to choose between and from. And I think that's really positive for everybody. So unusually for me, trying to insert a positive note there. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Malfred. So we've got about sort of 7 minutes left on this, and then a few minutes for, so basically we've got, what is it now? About 15 minutes left. So is there anything that anyone else would like to raise on the panel with regard to this question? If not, we can open it out to other members and anyone that's here that wants to raise a point. Benoit, I can see your note in the chat. Did you want to add to that, or yeah?
Just one additional idea. If we're looking for sources of funding, one of the findings in recent years is that it's hard for us people and analysts to believe in what we know about our nuclear vulnerability. And one of the findings is that the arts have helped us come to believe in what we otherwise know about our nuclear vulnerability. Therefore, that suggests that the world of the arts could become a potential source of funding that could help us develop that dimension of the work. That was just an idea, and I don't know if some of you guys are already exploring sources of funding coming from the artistic world.
That's great. Thank you, Benoit. Francesca.
Patricia, is it okay to ask questions now to the panelists?
I think so. Does anyone have any of the panelists, anything that they want to raise? I think if I just very quickly sort of summarize, sorry, Francesca, if it's okay, just have a few minutes, just to sort of wrap this up a little bit. So in our discussions that we've had this morning, we've been looking at the future of the European field. And I realized that I should have really raised that at the very beginning. So just to remind everyone, that's what we've been looking at. We've looked at necessary topics. We've talked about technology. We've talked about new types of methodologies. We've looked at talked about the funding and issues associated with that. We've highlighted the gender issue, which hopefully we can come back to, but that's sort of a point. I think in general, the discussion has been quite optimistic that there are opportunities and that the field is developing, and that even though we're living in quite a challenging time with regards to the nuclear issues and nuclear threats, there are still possibilities. And then finally, that last question about major funding, the point that I picked up, and again, if I've misinterpreted you all, then please let me know, is that actually if you've got a good idea, research that idea, follow the passion, follow the idea, follow the interest, and make it work. And therefore don't sort of be tied to particular interests of a funder. As Malfred said, if you have a bid that you want, a particular funder doesn't meet the criteria of a particular funder, try and find another funding source. And that there's optimism in Europe that there is funding because of the situation that we're in. There is actually more funding. And coming back to Stephen's point, if you want to talk about the return of nuclear weapons and sort of hard power issues, then there is even more funding than if you want to talk about alternative issues. Stephen, would you agree? I haven't interpreted you falsely, have I?
No, I think that's right. I think that funders have their calls for proposals and things that they're looking for. And I think that people follow where the money is in many senses. I think there's a problem when people are not interested in an actual research topic or question and gear their research entirely on that basis. But I think that's right. And I think it's fair to say that those associated with the nuclear weapons complex have a lot more money than those who are dealing with disarmament issues, although I think Malfred is right, and there is new funding available in the disarmament space.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we'll open it out to questions. We'll give about sort of 10 minutes, questions and discussion. And again, I'm going to sort of take on the chair's role that I may interrupt you if time is an issue or if we're sort of veered slightly off topic. And then just to recap for everyone, the scheduling, we take a break at 10:50, a 10-minute break, and then we're back for 11 for the next panel, which will be addressing Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and the wider nuclear field. Okay, so I've got 3 hands up. I've got Francesca, I've got Paul, and I've got Matt Harries. So let's go with the 3 of you, and I will just say just a few minutes per person, so I may have to sort of interrupt. So that's wonderful. So if we start with Francesca.
Thank you, Patricia, and good morning, everyone. I'm in Philly for the UPenn Nuclear Colloquium, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, so I hope to make sense. I have a question for all my European colleagues. As you know, I'm a European working for Harvard Kennedy School. It's a policy school. What has concerned me in the past few months has been a very clear direction here in the US about shaping the European future after Ukraine. And so there is a lot of money now coming in to tell the Europeans what our security is going to be about. And I've been just invited to join a Hoover Institute group with lots of old white men in the Bush administration time that tells, how NATO needs to be reshaped, how new nuclear weapons need to be thought about, and so on and so forth. My concern, and I have to be very honest here, guys, because I'm European like you, if we don't push back against this, the European future is going to be dictated from Washington yet again. And this is where, in my view, the academics need to also have a very clear intent here to make sure that we are readable, we are accessible also to policymakers in the United States that think here the Europeans are just talking about diversity and inclusion and norms and so on and so forth. They actually clearly don't have a view about their security. And so that poses, in my view, a very clear dilemma here. Is like, how are you going to respond to this? Because the money is coming, and you will have an influx of scholarship produced here in the United States about the Europe future, and that really concerns me greatly.
That's great. I'll tell you what, shall we take the 3 questions and then we'll take it to the panel, and then that way we can measure how we're doing for time. Okay, lovely. So Paul.
Thank you. I think what I'm about to say overlaps with Francesca, maybe, which is that I understand that the sort of the anxiety and cultural distaste for the large nuclear political structures that I've come from, but I think taking that too far risks cutting off quite valuable possibilities, because departments in those structures, certainly in Britain and America, I know less about France, I suspect there too, and in NATO as a whole, is looking for ways to deal with the new situation, which we'll discuss in the next session. They are aware of the pressures for nuclear rearmament and a nuclear reactive stress on dealing with nuclear threats, but they're looking for ways out, or at least alternatives. Ideas which will play well in disarmament fora, which will appeal to particular rather liberal political constituencies. And to the extent that researchers can point to that, a set of ideas which might be compatible with the security anxieties experienced by European governments, but might not cut off possibilities to a better, less dangerous nuclear future, I think they would be consumed avidly, and money would be forthcoming for those, which from all points of view, keeping research relevant and actually trying to find our way into a less dangerous future seems to me extremely desirable and shouldn't be cut off on grounds of purity.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. And then Matt.
Thanks, Patricia, and thanks for everybody's contributions to this discussion so far. I'm amazed we got through a panel on funding without talking about the effect of altruist movement and the new money that's coming into the nuclear field from that side, because I think there is if we're talking about the goals of funders and how that shapes the field, I think there is going to be quite a big conversation to be had about what EA money means for nuclear studies. On the one hand, it's really, really good to have more money for nuclear research. It's very good to have people from painting with a broad brush, what you might call a tech background, interested in our field, given that some of the most important stuff in the world is happening now in AI, and for people who have links to that community to be interested in what we do, I think is great. On the other hand, methodologically, that community has very, very clear views about how it works. Highly rationalist, strong emphasis on quantitative methods, but also does not see itself as having a job to sort of nurture topics that have been neglected by other funders necessarily. The EA community looks for high leverage situations where it can change stuff and explicitly wants to devote money to the things that it thinks is a good idea, and kept money away from the things that it thinks are not worth it. So I think on the one hand, lots of opportunities, potentially after the collapse of FTX, a bit less money than people thought initially, but still quite a lot of money arriving in the field, and fairly big questions about how it'll shape the agenda, because ultimately for that kind of philanthropic money, especially where the people, it's not foundation money, it is the money of ultimately individual donors who are still living and are giving for a reason. The sell has to be that the work it's going to fund is going to do something, and if the community that's funding it has a very clear idea of what that something is, then there will be some balancing to do, I think, between the research that people want to do and the interest of the funders, and it's not as clear cut, I think, as some of the conversations that we've been having about where money comes from. I think on this one, it'll take a while to shake out what it actually means and how researchers manage those tensions.
That's lovely, great. So Reese, I've seen you've come in. So if you'd like to say sort of just a few words quite quickly, and then we've got sort of about 3 minutes for panelists to respond or to say any sort of closing thoughts or ideas. Okay, so Rhys, hi.
Hi, thank you. I just want to affirm some of Professor Belbida's comments, and I watched one of his lectures early on sort of transparency of funding in the nuclear field. So something I'd looked at in AI research as well, and existential risk. If you really look at Oxford and Cambridge and their centres for existential risk, something that I'm actually quite worried about, because Elon Musk has contributed some funding there as well. And if you look at someone like Nick Bostrom, who's very influential in the field, some of the conclusions that he comes to, even though I'm really interested in what he's trying to say, and hopefully I can apply some of his ideas back to nuclear existential risk. I'm really worried at things like he says that we should be looking at things like mass surveillance and things. I know this is in the AI field, but we have to really look at what's coming maybe out of that machine, after the funding that it's received. So I'll keep it short, but just some ideas there.
That's great. Thank you, Rhys. Right, so we've got like 2 minutes. So I don't really want to go around and sort of ask each person. Maybe I'll just open it out and say, sort of panelists, are there any closing remarks or any feedback to any of those questions that you'd like to raise? There's some notes in the chat too, which I can see Seb's just left a note there. So thank you. Anything anyone wants to raise? Benoit.
Yeah, just a quick reactions to Francesca and Paul's points. I mean, the whole funding from the effective altruism money and from, in general, sources of techno-utopianism should be kind of a particular concern, and I don't have anything intelligent to say about it, so I'll park that for a second. But I would say, I think, two things. One is on the general issue of speaking truth to power. Far from me the idea that we should stop doing that, but one of the things that we can say the cumulative field of nuclear studies has established is that the public justifications for nuclear weapons policies do not match the causes for weapons procurement. So why should we suddenly pretend that they will? And therefore, we should simply talk to policymakers, and then they were waiting to see the light, because what the scholarship has documented is that it actually never worked that way. So, hopefully in the future, one day it may, but that sounds like extraordinarily optimistic, which surprises me, coming from Paul, who's not usually the optimist in the room. And the other thing on Francesca's point is that I think there's still a lot of fundamental discoveries that can be made, again, about the effects of the nuclearization of the world on key institutions that we hold dear. So I think let's just do this work. We're not supposed to be political operatives. And if our findings are useful to political operatives, great. But, those are two different kind of jobs.
Excellent. Thank you, Benoit. So I think we're up for time. Anyone have anything burning that they want to say? Okay, great. So let's take a 10-minute pause. Let me say a huge thank you to all of you, to Malfred, Michal, Cameron, Benoit, Stephen, Drew, and Olamide. Unfortunately, he's had some technical issues, so I know he's I don't think I can see him here, so he might be back. I say let's take a break now and reconvene at 11 o'clock for the next panel, which is Roundtable 2, Russia's War of Aggression Against Ukraine and the Wider Nuclear Field. So just a very big thank you. This is where I can do a little clap. Thank you very much to everyone for really insightful advice and feedback, and some really interesting discussions.
But in case you're just joining us, in case you don't know me, I'm Luba Zatsepina. I'm a lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University and also one of the incoming conveners of the Global Nuclear Order BISA working group. So myself and 2 other people will be replacing Patricia and Nicola in the coming months, although, you know, I'm sure you'll agree with me, I'll be hard to replace. So I think, do we have everyone back? Let me just check. Patricia, is anybody missing from the panel?
I pronounce awful with pronunciations. Guka, is she here?
Yes, she's here.
Have I pronounced your name right? Have I said it wrong? Was that okay?
It's close.
Close. Apologies. Excellent.
Okay, perfect. I think we can start then. So thanks once again for joining us on at this GNO event, 2 roundtables on the futures in nuclear field. We had a brilliant first panel on the European, focusing on the European nuclear field. And today, and of course, you know, currently it's really hard to talk about European field without talking about the ongoing war that is happening in Europe. And so our second roundtable will focus specifically on that. So we have 7 brilliant participants. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So the title of this roundtable is Russia's War of Aggression Against Ukraine and the Wider Nuclear Field. So as with the previous panel, we will have 3 questions. I would say the first one is probably one of the broader questions, but generally I'm going to time it. So I'm going to dedicate 20 minutes per question. As we did before, perhaps we can come back to the first question if, you know, if everybody said everything they wanted to say. So let me just briefly introduce our participants today. We have a lot of directors on the panel. So we have Dr. Doreen Horschig, who is an associate fellow at Center for Strategic and International Studies. We have Gauhar Mukhajanova, who is a director of the International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program at Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nuclear Non-Proliferation. We have Sebastian Brixey-Williams, who is the Executive Director at BASIC. We have Dr. Matthew Harris, who is the Director of Proliferation and Nuclear Policy at the Royal United Services Institute. We have Dr. Francesca Giovanni, Executive Director of the Project on Managing the Atom at Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard Policy School. We also have Dr. Ulrich Kuhn, who is the Head of Arms Control and Emerging Technologies at the University of Hamburg. And we have Jane Kinnenmon, who's the Director of Policy and Impact European Leadership Network. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to open the floor and I'm going to give you this first question that we want you to focus on today. So how does the war in Ukraine challenge or confirm nuclear narratives and concepts in the field? So as I said, very big question. So would anybody like to go first and, you know, and have some opening remarks so we can bounce off of that? Sebastian, I'll come to you first. Thank you.
Thanks, Luba, and nice to see you. I mean, my take on this is that the war in Ukraine, as with so many events in this field, confirms the narratives for all sides. So you have those who are, you know, instinctive with the belief that nuclear weapons provide deterrence, who say, well, look, evidently Russia has been deterred from getting even more involved in this war or trying to bring NATO into this war in some way. On the other hand, you have people saying, you know, I think quite reasonably NATO has been deterred from, say, putting boots on the ground or whatever it is by Russia's nuclear threats. I have to say, you know, I think I've seen fewer people than I expected trying to make the argument that this means that, you know, really this is the turning point and nuclear weapons need to go. There have been a few people saying that, you know, obviously mostly from a peace community perspective, but they haven't seemingly been amplified very much. And I don't think the arguments have been made in an especially compelling way either. It's mostly the same kinds of lines, but with a new framing on it. Whereas I think, I mean, sort of speaking analytically, it seems to me that the argument that nuclear weapons have played a sort of positive role in this war in preventing sort of spillover on both sides has been made more compellingly. And I think, you know, from the perspective of the general public, there's polling to suggest that seems to be sort of a shift towards that kind of opinion, particularly from those people who didn't really have a strong opinion before. The other narrative that I've seen coming up over and over again, particularly in sort of in personal conversations with friends around the dinner table, is, well, what do you think about this idea that Ukraine should have kept its nuclear weapons? Which obviously has been debunked pretty well in the academic literature by people like Maria Rost-Rubli, but nevertheless, you know, spilled into the media space over and over and over again, and therefore has left that sort of hanging question mark in people's minds. And I think it really speaks to the importance of all of us working to debunk that myth, sadly, over and over again. Probably being on the front foot about that as well, if we're involved in conversations about Ukraine that involve people who maybe haven't read that kind of literature, because it is seemingly quite a pervasive one. And then I think there's this, I mean, part of the way it seems to me that the Western governments have grappled with the fact that Russia has made nuclear threats over the last couple of years has been to try to work out a way of qualitatively distinguishing Russia's threats from the sort of the day-by-day threats of deterrence more generally. And so the sort of the framing of Russia's threats as irresponsible rhetoric in terms of coercive nuclear threats versus I'm not sure what the opposite of that is, but the sort of quote unquote normal nuclear threats or legitimate nuclear threats or whatever they are, has been a sort of important way to try and make that sort of distinction. And that feeds into the conversation about responsible state behaviors, which it seems is picking up some steam as well. And of course, you know, we have to remember that all deterrence is coercive because it's based on threat. And I think it throws down the gauntlet a little bit to academics in this space, particularly to think about that and how we make distinctions between coercive versus non-coercive nuclear threats. And you know, you look back at some of the threats that Jeff Hoon made as was he Defense Secretary in 2002 in relation to Iraq, when the UK was making movements there, and actually some of those threats are quite similar in terms of quality. And so, you know, maybe that speaks to a bit of a shift in at least the UK mindset over the last 20 years. But we have to remember that what's happening isn't new and isn't unique to Russia as well. There have been sort of equivalent things happening on different sides of this debate. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. I think it's brilliant opening for this panel and brilliant outline of the current narratives that are prevalent in the field, you know, against the background of the war in Ukraine, and also, you know, your point on how seriously we should take Russia's nuclear threats. I think it's very timely considering the newest piece by Sergei Karaganov, which is, you know, widely discussed on Twitter currently. So we can definitely come back to that. So Jane, I'll come to you next.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here with such fantastic experts and to meet you all. And just as a word of background about myself, I'm not an academic nor really a nuclear specialist, but I work for the European Leadership Network, which is committed to reducing existential risks, especially from nuclear weapons. But I'm kind of a interloper into this field. I've been here for about 3 years, and my background is more in conflict resolution, political economy, multilateralism, and different things, including in the Middle East. And so I've been observing with great interest precisely what Seb has described, which is that much of the nuclear field is very divided into different camps over deterrence and disarmament, even though the multilateral legal regime that we have is supposed to provide for both things. So I find this quite interesting. I think it's also a field that is often quite siloed, and for instance, the deterrence theories that focus on the nuclear piece do not seem to connect up well with other peace studies, where there tends to be much more that is looking at cooperation, incentives, economic interdependence, issues of justice, etc. So that's kind of interesting as well. And clearly, when we come to the war in Ukraine, people have used in many ways the developments to confirm their own views, which is a very human tendency. But I think it is hard not to believe the argument that NATO's deterrence has worked for NATO itself. And it shows maybe a more limited picture of deterrence than some of the biggest proponents of deterrence might like to claim. Because I think we have sometimes a confusion between whether the nuclear states are deterring threats just to themselves or keeping a broader, inclusive international peace. And clearly, what has happened here is that, Russia has used nuclear weapons to deter NATO from getting more involved in Ukraine, but at the same time, Russia has not extended its threats to NATO countries, has not even seriously threatened Sweden and Finland in what was thought to be quite a vulnerable period for them between saying they wanted to join NATO and actually joining NATO. We've seen the US be quite explicit that it does not want to put boots on the ground in Ukraine because a shooting war with Russia would be the start of World War III, as Biden has put it. We cannot be absolutely certain that this deterrence is fundamentally about nuclear deterrence, because we don't have a counterfactual to know what would happen if Russia and the US were squaring off against each other with neither side having nuclear weapons. But we can see that they are both constrained by the fear of the kind of escalation that could happen. However, nobody is really 100% confident that nuclear weapons will not be used in some kind of so-called limited way within Ukraine. And therefore, as has also been mentioned, there is a lot of narratives about should Ukraine actually have kept nuclear weapons if it could have, or should it have them now? And it exposes really the deep tension between the narratives about deterrence and the narratives about the need for non-proliferation, which often do come from the same P5 countries. So just to kind of round off, right now, I'm in a hotel room because I am attending a dialogue session between people from Iran and people from Saudi Arabia. And of course, Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but it has also been articulating a narrative that if Iran does, we will have too. And there is an understanding or a narrative among very smart people from these countries who are not nuclear specialists and not much interested in the theory that at the end of the day, the big powers feel that these weapons are useful for them. Maybe it would have helped Ukraine if they had these weapons. India and Pakistan have got them and no one's really done anything. So why not us too? But only a minority of people who study nuclear weapons think that it would be a safer world if you had kind of multiplication of nuclear proliferation. And there seems to really be a failure to get to grips with this. How can you square the calls for deterrence and the calls for non-proliferation? I look forward very much to hearing the views of others in this space, which is evolving pretty fast. I think just the final thing I would say, actually, I should mention, because there is a question about kind of how the field is changing. I think obviously the withdrawal of the MacArthur Foundation, who are, for a long time, one of our funders, has put a big challenge to the whole field, because the field is full of initiatives for young scholars, but not necessarily full of jobs for them to go to. And something that we are working on at ELN, we have a network of new European voices on existential risk, and we are trying to bring nuclear knowledge into wider discussions about existential risk from new technologies and from climate change, because maybe actually the future nuclear policy jobs will not only be about nuclear, but will be about a portfolio of serious risks that demand international cooperation, which governments struggle sometimes to get to grips with.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you again for also already answering our third question for the panel. Thank you. Francesca, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. I would like to focus on the trajectory of scholarship, and I want to divide this into two phases: during the crisis, during the war, and the after war. And I also want to underscore, I come from a policy school. Harvard Kennedy School is meant to produce scholarship that inform policy. So it's inevitable that we are connected with the policy debates, and especially with the nuclear deterrence debate that is going on today. But I subscribe to everything that Seb and Jane has said, that we have fundamentally now, confirmed or entrenched in a way the silos thinking that we all observed in between deterrence and disarmament. But I think there have been some important changes on scholarship when it comes to the questions we ask about nuclear deterrence that I would like to point out. The first, in my view, is that we are all, I think we've all come to realize today that we've focused too much on nuclear deterrence and not enough on nuclear coercion. And how does nuclear coercion and nuclear blackmailing look like in a time of crisis and great powers competition, I think is a really important point. I think these are two distinct strategies, and I think they deserve to be understood in separate ways. And so, how does nuclear coercion, nuclear blackmailing linked to nuclear deterrence? How does it instead, consist of separate strategy? I think it's an important thing that's come up over and over in my discussions, and also in some of the new work that we are commissioning. I think the second very important distinction that I think, Seb, you mentioned is really the difference between nuclear threats and nuclear signals, and what actually does it mean, right? And I remember Ulrich and I were in China, where I actually asked the question to our Chinese scholars, because they perceive most of what Putin said as a nuclear signaling as part of the ordinary nuclear deterrence. And for us coming from Europe, that was really a nuclear threat. And so are signal and threats, two different things, or it depends who the audience is? I think that's a really important question. In my view, we have not thought very much about. I think there is a third group of important questions that actually relate much broader to the multipolar, bipolar world. This new axis, US and Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, I think does somehow, generate the question, are we seeing the emergence really of the multipolar world, or are we seeing instead a bipolar world just created by blocks? And that will have important repercussions about how we think about the deterrence strategy, or disarmament strategies, or anything in the field. I think the fourth really important opportunity that the war has opened, in my view, is that the West has finally discovered the global South. Winning the hearts and minds of the global South has now become the strategic goal of the Biden administration and of the nuclear community. And so that, in my view, opens really important opportunities for scholars to explore historical relations with countries that normally we wouldn't have cared about, right? And so why is Brazil or why South Africa take certain positions about the Ukraine war? I think that now opens a door for new work on this, which nobody would have read or nobody would have commissioned before, to be honest. Final point on the in the war moment, I was surprised about how little we actually embrace the question about what happens if the nuclear taboo gets broken, right? So where do we go from there, right? Where do we go from the first nuclear strike? And in part, in my view, the community was very reluctant or engaging in an hypothetical. We didn't, in my view, wanted to endorse the possibility of a scenario like this. But I think we missed also an opportunity to really emphasize the importance of a nuclear taboo that exists. And that, to me, is a question about, what happens the day after that might be worth exploring. But I want to say a couple of things about the after war. So I think this is where the scholarship is going to face the greatest challenges, in my view. I think there was an already ongoing attack on what I would consider nuclear norms, even before the Ukraine war. People were already attacking the concept of arms control. I think you will see this on steroids after the Ukraine war ends. And the idea is that many of the nuclear norms that were built before, with the understanding that you had civilized, adversaries, are no longer the case, right? So the idea here in the US is, why would I even bother, thinking or writing about arms control when I face basically a bunch of barbarians? So you are going to see, in my view, nuclear norms coming really under threat. In particular, I wrote already about this, but I think the nuclear testing norm is a real stake here. I think the arms control narrative, it can actually easily be lost, in my view, if we don't write seriously about this. And then you would see a bunch of like hardline positions coming, in my view, into the more conventional mainstream discussion. I think there is a real discussion here in the United States about going up in numbers again. Now they can't do it technically, but there is already a very big push for Strategic Command to introduce new numbers, high numbers, new tactical nuclear weapons, so a different kind of posture, nuclear targeting policy. So what you're going to see is a scholarship that thrives on the deterrence element and just try to specify these issues. And in my view, in that the field and the dialogue is really going to be much narrower in the United States. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Francesca. Some excellent points here. I particularly find it really interesting to talk about exploring the historical relations between the West and the global South is something that often gets overlooked. So thank you very much for bringing this up. Doreen, I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Luba, and the rest of the team for putting this roundtable together. I've been in listening mode for the first panel, and it was already really interesting. So we'll see if we can add a little more here. So Sebastian and the others, they already touched on some of the most important points, which I think is that the war seems to confirm this deterrence narrative on both sides. So I won't go into too much details there, but just try to touch on some other points. So first, I wanted to take a step back and speak on the nuclear field more generally. I think what changed or shifted as a result of the war is our measure of success in the nuclear field. I think after the Cold War and before the Ukraine war, a large part of the field was led by questions and research that had some sort of measurable and tangible outcome. So I think the questions we asked were sort of, how can one reduce the number of nuclear warheads, or how can we make progress towards disarmament? Is a world without nuclear weapons achievable, or are nuclear weapons a thing of the Cold War and the history? And now, with the war, I think the measure of success has shifted towards sort of a negative or nil measure that isn't as tangible and doesn't have the same outcome. So I think now we ask, like, how can we prevent something? How can we prevent the use of nuclear weapons? How can we prevent additional nuclear proliferation and new states from obtaining nuclear weapons? So I think instead of using disarmament as this measure of success, we now measure it through the prevention. And then next, and that's largely in agreement with the others, I think the war in Ukraine has raised concerns about the continued reliance on nuclear weapons in defense strategies, and even new or continued nuclear proliferation, so qualitative as well as quantitative proliferation. Some analysts argued that the failure of Russia to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and its territorial integrity may encourage other states to sort of reconsider their nuclear disarmament commitments and pursue or maintain nuclear weapons as means of ensuring their own security. So I think the war confirms the enduring salience of nuclear weapons as a tool of national security and how geopolitical tensions can impact states' decisions regarding their nuclear posture. So it really highlights this like interplay between non-proliferation efforts and global security dynamics. And then lastly, I think another challenge it has really posed is one to arms control, which I think is hardly disputable through Russia suspending New START participation, as well as strategic talks between the US and Russia being on ice. But besides that negative view, I do think that's also a chance for governments, and given my location, US Congress, to do more in the light of the Ukraine war. We've seen with the Cold War that times of tensions are usually, or have been historically, the ones where we made the most progress on arms control and risk reduction. But I'll leave that discussion open, and maybe we can come back to this arms control discussion. And I'll stop here for now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Doreen. Do other panelists have anything to add? Ulrich, Matt, Gaukhar. Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Luba, and nice to see you again. So I would add a couple of things. First is to second what Francesca said about thinking about the day after. So I think that the people who are interested in nuclear weapons need to think about what their research will look like the day after one is used, and you know, whether there's anything you'd change now if the taboo is broken and nuclear weapons are used. It's a question that should probably be keeping us all up at night at the minute. I personally, the question on the agenda is about nuclear narratives and concepts, and what makes me a bit nervous as someone who's not in academia anymore is that it's just looking around and noticing how few people are doing research on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence as weapons, as real tangible things, and how much is focused on sort of conceptually unpicking theory or the social construction of views towards nuclear deterrence, which is important, but it's so far away from the conversations that are happening in most governments in nuclear weapon states or nuclear alliance states at the minute, that I find it a bit worrying. I mean, basically, there's, you know, we in the kind of research that we and convening that we do, we're often trying to put together panels on you know, specific nuclear scenarios, or give advice or contribute thoughts on you know, what should NATO's response be if Russia uses a nuclear weapon, or what is the most effective way to deter Russia from using a nuclear weapon. And in doing that, we often have to look for people to give specific thoughts on that question, you know, concrete, tangible recommendations, policy ideas and recommendations. And the list of people who have expertise in sort of political military aspects of nuclear weapons, or purely military aspects of nuclear weapons, or strategic conventional forces, or whatever, is really short. I mean, the list of people who can actually competently contribute to that kind of discussion is really short. Not because I think there's anything special about those topics that makes it impossible for people to do it, or you have to be particularly clever or anything like that, but just because so many people choose not to engage with them, either for political ideological reasons, which is, you know, if you start from the position that nuclear deterrence is a myth, then it's hard to engage with specific questions about how to do nuclear deterrence. Or for just career path reasons, or for shape of the research field reasons. But the thing that worries me is basically that, you know, what I have seen change on the sort of customer side of our research, you know, people who might want to be reading it, is that there's a much bigger appetite to know in governments and among the public and among journalists, you know, what is this nuclear deterrence thing, and what is supposed to be happening right now, and what are these weapons for exactly, and how does this work, and on sort of fairly kind of basic stuff, and you know, in European governments where nuclear issues haven't been a route to sort of a glittering civil service career for a very long time, and where there just hasn't been much habit of thinking about them for a long time, there's just a big appetite to know more about what's going on and be informed. And so yeah, so my reflection on how the field has changed is that there is increasing demand for critical thought within the logic of nuclear deterrence, which at the minute is not being satisfied, because people have decided that they are pro-deterrence and therefore don't want to be too critical, or people have decided that they are anti-deterrence and therefore don't want to engage in detailed discussions about how to do deterrence, because that would be accepting the premise of something that they don't want to accept. Which strikes me as quite kind of unsatisfactory solution, which is not to try to persuade anybody to stop critically deconstructing deterrence from the outside, because I think that's necessary as well. But I do think there's more space for thought and challenge within the framework of deterrence, because I feel like I can't be the only person who believes that deterrence does exist, but also isn't satisfied necessarily with all aspects of how it works. That seems like it has to be a larger, a more widespread policy position than sometimes it seems at the minute.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Nice to see you again also. And I think it's a brilliant point, a brilliant question that I haven't immediately thought of, but you're absolutely right. In terms of this domination in academia of sort of studying the social construction rather than material, tangible. And I mean, just something I noticed, just a very quick reflection in terms of how I've seen security being taught, for example, and I can't speak obviously for all institutions, but from my own personal observation, somehow we do tend to not focus on technical aspects, because a lot of the time lecturers might not feel comfortable teaching them or think they might not know enough, and jump straight into the critical, right? And this is something I personally also notice myself doing, focus very little on the material aspects of deterrence and jumping straight to your social constructivist approaches and post-structuralism. So I think it's a really interesting question. So I'm gonna come to Ulrich and Gohar next, but just so because I knew this question was gonna take longer, so I abandoned my 20 minutes per question strategy. But just when I come to you both, could you please also have a think about our next question, which is how do you think the funding has been changed or altered, or funding opportunities as the result of the war? So narrative and concepts, but also if you have anything to say, perhaps a few words about the funding as well. Thank you, Ulrich. I'll come to you next.
Sure. Thank you, Luba, and thanks to BISA for inviting me. I just wanted to reply to Matt that before the session here, which was not related to it, I just read Nuclear Ethics Revisited from Joe Nye. And he makes a couple of the points that you just raised. So that's perhaps a recommended reading. Just came out this year, earlier this year. So to your point, Luba, let me just quickly say the three main points that I wanted to raise as regards challenges or confirmations to nuclear narratives and concepts, and then move on to the question about funding. I basically think that there are three areas or fields where certain narratives and concepts have been confirmed or have been challenged. And I will not get into each one of those because we're running out of time. I get it. My 3 points are the previous focus in recent years, I would say almost the last 10 years, focusing on inadvertent escalation pathways may seem less relevant in light of what we learned in the Ukraine war. And instead, our field might have to shift its focus also a bit more towards deliberate escalation pathways, and therewith entering the broader realm of policies aimed at mitigating those deliberate escalation pathways. That's one point. The second one, and it was in a way mentioned here, and you might also say correctly that this is a commonplace, is that war is not good. It's not a good time for arms control, and we have seen that. Just saying the Budapest Memorandum, New START, Cluster Munitions Convention. This is a confirmation of what arms controllers have written since a long time. Or let me point you back to the piece of Colin Gray. I think, therefore, we should ask ourselves whether it makes sense for calls or concepts for compartmentalizing geostrategic conflict from arms control, whether that's really worthwhile pursuing. I get it, and I would love to see the parties start compartmentalizing these issues, but it looks like that this is certainly not the case on the Russian side. And I would also argue one of the takeaways is I personally see the taboo strengthened through the war in Ukraine. However, I would also argue that it's still under heightened pressure. I mean, if we have seen the statement from the G20 at the Bali declaration last year, the new G20 statement, which reiterated the language, the statements by Bill Burns, how helpful it was that the Chinese and the Indians talked to the Russian leadership. So I think that this is something that confirms that there is this norm, and I would see it rather strengthened. However, I also do get it if people are worried that because the heightened pressure of the nuclear threats by Vladimir Putin and perhaps by a new US president, Donald Trump, in the future, that this would put much more pressure again on the nuclear taboo. Okay, let's leave it with that and let's get to the funding realm. Someone has said it already at the beginning. I would argue the biggest blow to our field was MacArthur leaving the field. And as we know, that had nothing to do with the Ukraine war because that decision was made much earlier. But we should ask ourselves the reasons that MacArthur put forward, basically saying that the field had no impact in terms of policy. That's something where we have to critically ask ourselves, is that the case? And if that is the case, even partially, then how can we change that? And perhaps we need to get into some areas of research and policy work that we haven't touched upon so much in the past. Matt just outlined one. There are others, I would argue, but that's something where we have to critically self-reflect. There is certainly more funding coming these days from so-called existential risk entities. And I do get it. I mean, they have big pockets and a lot of the folks in nuclear fields are going towards that direction. But honestly, I'm not sure whether that is a good thing or a bad development for the field. In a couple of years, we will probably see. In addition, formerly pro-disarmament countries, particularly in Northern Europe, have shifted their focus, some of them due to domestic developments like in Sweden. Sweden was always a big funder of disarmament research, and they have now a very conservative government, so they have turned away from that. Others might follow because of a kind of anticipation of NATO enlargement that is taking place in Europe's high north. So this is all not really good for the field, and particularly the field that concerns itself with arms control and disarmament, non-proliferation issues. So all in all, I would argue that research funding has become more scarce in a time, well, where it would be needed the most. But unfortunately, that is where we are. I'll leave you on that happy note. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Gulhar, I'll come to you next.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's tough to follow everybody here, so I have to agree with a lot of points that were made, especially on this evidence that the war has had the effect of confirming the biases and opinions that a lot of us, a lot of people in the field already had, and that goes for the diplomatic world as well. And here's my disclaimer: I am not an academic. I don't work in academia. I am in the policy and diplomacy world, so that's a lot of my observations are affected by what's going on there. And so I think we do see the reconfirmation and kind of re-entrenchment of positions about the usefulness of nuclear weapons, the validity of nuclear deterrence versus its immorality, lack of utility. And I think something that Francesca also mentioned, the role of the Global South and some of the big powers in the Global South, how they've responded to the war. I think that really ought to preoccupy the research a bit more, and about the future directions in that regard. And here I want to respond to what several colleagues mentioned, and that's sort of the attack on arms control and the norms. I find it interesting that maybe because the war was such a shock to the system here in Europe in particular, we tend to forget that those trends were there before. So I'm a little bit cautious about losing sight of the fact that some of those underlying trends were there. And we were concerned about the decline of arms control and the attack on norms. We were concerned about the sort of alliances, etc., before, and the risk of use of nuclear weapons before the full-scale invasion started. And so a little bit of what I've seen in the past year or so is the tendency to attribute everything to the invasion and to specifically Russian behavior in that context. And it would be important, I think, not to lose sight of what trends were already in place before, and then we can examine how those trends were affected, whether they were exacerbated or countered. I think the alliance is now in a stronger position. The transatlantic alliance is in a stronger position than it was before. The US really came through, but some of the attacks on arms control, the belief that they really have to build up rather than concluding more arms control agreements. I think that was already there before the war, and it's important to still remember why that was happening and what the future might be in that regard. And on the funding, well, one per se kind of direct impact has been that some of the funders, like Norway, simply channel their funding to direct support to the IA, for example, in support of its missions in Ukraine. And so, there's not an infinite pot of money. If there's more has to go to the IA and others, then there's less to go to research and other such activities on arms control and arms, etc. On the other hand, we do see resurgence of interest, I think, in Europe, and I think that probably was starting before the war as well, but now it's stronger. It's about the relations with Russia, what happens with European security in the longer term, what the relationship with Russia is going to be, and maybe we'll see a bit more funding going that way from governments in Europe. On the foundations, MacArthur being a big blow, I agree. Everybody would agree, I think, with that, and why that happened. And that may touch a little bit on how the field changed, and that's the third question. In my time in the field, I have seen greater fascination and use by foundations, especially, of the monitoring and evaluation metrics in their funding. I don't think that was necessarily the case before, and I could conclude that by the reactions of the colleagues who had been in the field before me, and they clearly struggled with this whole shift to monitoring the concrete outputs and outcomes and long-term impacts style, which I recognized having come from the development world. So those approaches that were developed in the world where you could effectively measure and prove impact, they kind of crept into the world where it's much harder to measure those things. And I think that that has affected how the foundations approach the attention the resources they devote to the nuclear. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gohar. So I'll come to Francesca and Seb next. But just to remind everyone, I mean, we have about 20 minutes or so left. I think a lot has been said about funding already, and also the first panel discussed this at length. So just want to remind everyone of our third question, which is how has the field evolved since you have started? And that could include funding, it could include career opportunities, it could include also the issue of diversity and inclusion that we have discussed before. But just please keep it in mind that if our panelists could say a few words about this as well. So Francesca, if you want to go first, please. Thank you.
Luba, I wanted to focus though on funding for a second, because I also have a proposal. So from the US standpoint, there will be a very massive redistribution of funding away from foundations and into government. So just to give you an example, I was at Strategic Command in August for the Deterrence Symposium. For the first time, Strategic Command received $2 million from Congress to fund research. And you will see this from Pacific Command, US Europe Command. So they all are now establishing academic alliances. And the idea is that, you know, they want to fund research. This is great if you are in a certain type of canon, if you believe that, you know, you want to strengthen deterrence, but Strategic Command is not going to fund a big diversity of opinions, right? So we contend with the field that will have a critical injection of money in a certain type of direction that serves, you know, specific purpose. Now, the best part, however, of this academic alliances that are now being established, you know, across, you know, functional departments and agencies of the US is that they do all have a public research agenda. And so Strategic Command, for example, every year, you know, publish all the 12 critical questions they need to address. And I think that opens up, in my view, an opportunity for scholars to engage with those questions not necessarily to provide the answers Strategic Command is looking for, but perhaps also to, promote more of their scholarship or their line of thinking along this research. And if you're interested in the research questions that Stratcom is looking an answer for this year, I'm happy to send the document. So more funding on government channeled through specific channels, at least in the United States. And what is happening with the foundations that have stayed, and I'm thinking in particular about Stanton. I don't know if anybody here knows, but Stanton Foundation is exiting the field as of the 31st of December 2025. So we are also losing Stanton at the end of 2025. The foundations that have left are now thinking in very different terms about funding research. And funding research for many of these foundations mean funding chairs in departments. And so creating a permanent position within the university, not necessarily funding a stream of research, but to have a person permanently that is the chair in nuclear studies in a given university. And in my view, that detracts and take away even more funding for people who actually don't want an academic career, but they want actually maybe to be part of a research portfolio. Let me, however, say one thing that I think is important that is happening. I was involved in a first discussion led by Secretary Moniz at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Ernie Moniz is going around the country to talk to very important institutions in the United States. He came to Harvard, he's talking to MIT, he's talking next to Princeton, and just basically asking these universities to use some of their endowments, so not fundraising, but their own endowment, to create a pot of money, an endow program on nuclear studies, so that these universities can continue to hire researchers, hire younger scholars on a temporary basis to actually maintain the field alive. And Ernie said very clearly he's very concerned about dwindling of money, the redirecting towards military industrial complex, because that will kill diversity, in my view. And so I think my sense, Luba, is that we need to do something as academics, as scholars, maybe writing letters, create a sort of, a letter signed by scholars in this field, demanding universities that can do this, to put funding towards nuclear studies. It is ridiculous at Harvard, we have $60 billion in endowment, and we're still functioning on fundraising for our researchers. So I think we have a responsibility here to try actually to very clearly signal that there is a need to put money from universities that can towards that kind of study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. This is very helpful. A lot to think about here, and I also think this would be really helpful for our members who will watch this recording later of this event. Thank you. Sebastian?
Thanks, Luba. And I'm sorry, but I did also want to focus mostly on the funding point. And it was just to kind of build on something that Francesca just said, which is with injections like the Stratcom injection that she's mentioned, and the sort of skewing further towards more conservative positions, there is an equivalent decline on the other side in terms of sort of more progressive funding as well. And I'll take the UK context here. Traditionally, the peace community or more disarmament affiliated organizations, but to put it that way, have been able to rely on a number of Quaker-related trusts here in the UK. So the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Foundation, Paul and Puckham, Marmot, there's several of them, and they're typically sort of people of a certain political persuasion, perhaps of a certain age, and each of those foundations, for one reason or another, seems to be moving away from providing funding to nuclear organizations. There are other security issues on the agenda, so race has become a big one. JRCT, Joseph Rowntree, had to come to terms with the fact that they had sort of major investments in the slave trade in earlier centuries, and they're now sort of trying to redress that, and a lot of that is coming back as reducing funding in other areas that they've supported for a long time. And with the UK having one of the most active sort of anti-nuclear communities, that has quite not just a national impact, I think, but a global impact. And certainly certain organizations from overseas have relied on those foundations as well. And then the other thing I was going to mention was sort of building on what Matt said about effective altruism. They need to be part of the conversation, but my impression of them at the moment, and we have sought to sort of engage with them and understand what that kind of community is thinking, is they're generally operating as a separate system from the mainstream nuclear community. And some organizations, ELN being one, have managed to sort of make the bridge. And hats off to you, because I don't think it's an easy thing to do necessarily. But generally, there's so much caution coming from the EA side about what the rest of us are doing. And I think partly they're a bit afraid of being sort of infected almost with old ways of thinking. They'd like to start from scratch. And that has its pros and cons that can bring kind of refreshing view of things. But it also means there's a lot of learning that they're perhaps not bringing forwards. And I also don't get the sense that the EA community is that bothered about the kind of field building side of things. So thinking about gender, for example, thinking about EDI more broadly, thinking about how organizations can collaborate, how we can provide a steady pipeline of people moving through this field. It tends to be very, very hyper project focused and looking obviously at only those projects that can have the most measurable impact in a relatively short to medium term way. So I think we have to be quite cautious about how much trust we put in effective altruism to kind of come riding to our aid at the moment of MacArthur's departure. Yeah, kind of a call to sanguineness, I suppose. The final thing I was going to say, and this is more about sort of the third question here, was I think the shift towards thinking about gender and diversity more generally in the field, kind of that happened roughly during the Trump administration, was a response to how hopeless it looked that we could actually do anything else. I think people were trying to find something they could work on that was field related. And I wonder if we end up having another Republican president and maybe other issues to deal with, we may find ourselves, rightly or wrongly, thinking about other things like that. And firstly, we have to make sure we don't lose sight of the main problem, which is the risk. We've got to keep working on that. But I do wonder if there are other dimensions that the field could grapple with, namely, for example, its environmental impact and the fact we all fly huge amounts around the world, or some of the other kind of past harms of nuclear weapons use, or, you know, I'm taking use here in a broad way, not just the use in terms of testing or deliberate use, but also all the various harms that come from nuclear weapons that haven't really been adequately addressed by many of the nuclear weapon state governments. And that might be something, particularly as we move towards thinking about sort of responsible state behaviors or countries trying to differentiate themselves as one nuclear weapon state from another nuclear weapon state. Some of those sort of acts of looking back and atoning and correcting past issues, I think, might be a valuable thing for them to be doing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Just to let everyone know, we have about 10 minutes left for others to comment. And after that, I would like to leave a few minutes for questions to our lovely participants. So Darine, please, I'll come to you next. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have 2 brief points on funding, but I'll move to the third question, I promise. I think Ulrich's question was really interesting on whether we as a field achieved enough policy impact or change. And I think funders, they, especially those that fund different fields, they are used to receiving a neat report at the end of their funding that sort of, you know, states the achievements and the deliverables and the percentage of whatever the research question was. So I think in the nuclear field, this is very different because oftentimes we look at what has not happened in the field. And I think the field has contributed to preventing nuclear use or containing nuclear weapons to only 9 countries, but also risk reduction and the prevention of nuclear testing. So I think, again, here, this measurement by the funders is just very different in the nuclear field than it may be in some of the hard sciences, for example. And then building on Gokos and Francesca's point on the global south. So I not only wonder if this funding doesn't reach the global south, but also it's very diverse thinking there. And there is, I believe, a tendency that we assume that the US and its allies are sort of in this pro-deterrence camp, and the global south is often summarized as one that's against a role of nuclear weapons. But I think there's such important differences there and internal nuances that also there need funding and need to be highlighted. And I think one of the fantastic recent examples is Africans Against the Bomb by Al Hamid. And I think these are the things we need to highlight more diverse voices in the South and not just always put the global South into like one camp. And okay, I'll move to the third question. So we get started on that. Since I'm on the junior side here, let me preface it with that it's probably less the changes I'm talking about, but the observations. At the risk of opening this discussion again, I did briefly wanted to give my 2 cents to the women in the nuclear field conversation of the earlier panel. And I did wanted to confirm Malfred's point that we have seen a large shift and it is a lot more gender balanced and female. I can confirm that I, as a younger scholar, haven't experienced this gap during my graduate study and early careers years as much anymore. And I think it actually looks a lot brighter than maybe we discussed in the first panel. When I organized panels and roundtables so far, I don't think I ever had problems getting women on the panels and avoiding these males. And I do agree with Nicola that in the end, we should focus on the outcome there rather than just the number of women in participation. Second, I think the European nuclear field really has very much changed. So when I first thought about studying nuclear issues as a German several years ago, I looked straight to the US. I was like, that's where my future is, that's where the hubs are. But I think that has fundamentally changed. And we have, just a lot more European hubs, whether that's in Oslo, Hamburg, or London, or Prague. And as Malfred and Michael touched on it in the first panel, there is this increased funding, especially from the European governments. And that's just fantastic to have these diverse views and sort of this challenge to have this American domination in views and research outputs. And then another third very positive thing I think is in the field is that we do have a lot of opportunities and funding in the nuclear field for young peoples. Comparing it with some of the colleagues from my graduate studies who did, terrorism studies or other things, I think the nuclear field has always had a large offering of workshops and fellowships and training opportunities. So I think there is a lot there that we can take advantage of, and it's not as bleak as some other fields. But I will sort of finish with a less positive point, and I think a real issue to bring bright and younger diverse generations into the field is that we often see the nuclear field as nibbling around the edges of the nuclear problems, and overall we don't see that much change, I would say. And I think that's something we as more junior and senior scholars need to work on to make younger generations feel like there is some change they can achieve. And I'm not sure what the best path is there to go or what the solutions are, but I think overall it's really difficult to pinpoint like the change that younger folks can have in the field. And that's for me.
Thank you so much, Doreen. Thank you. Would have been nice to have a more positive note, right? But there's so many issues that we've covered today that perhaps preclude is the word. Okay, so I'll come to Matt and Gauhar quickly, but just to let you know, mindful of the time, we have about 5 minutes. So if you could just give us a brief summary of your reflections on the third question, and I would still like to open the floor for some questions to you guys as well. So Matt, if you would like to come in.
Yeah, first thing is a big change is that the wider world is more interested in this field than it was when I started studying nuclear weapons, which was 2002, 2008, 2009 kind of time. There is just normal people are more interested in this stuff, which is good. Probably not for good reasons, because the world's got more dangerous, but the fact that people are interested is good. Second thing is that the field's gone through several waves of interest in particular topics that have obviously been linked to funding. So the Nuclear Security Summit process, for example, had huge amounts of money attached to it, both philanthropically and government money, and it created a lot of research, and a lot of that research was really, really good. But would it have existed if that money wasn't there? I don't know if it would. And you know, there've been a couple of moments like that where the research agenda has been funding led rather than researcher led, I would say. On diversity, equity, inclusion in the field, since I started, I think progress on diversity on its own has been quite obvious and quite good, in the sense that there's certainly much more stigma now attached to organising non-diverse events or activities. I think on equity and inclusion, there's probably quite a lot longer, more work to do to make sure that diverse voices are actually included in decision making and how the field is shaped, rather than just there being an emphasis on diversity as an end in itself. And I don't know, I got the impression in the last couple of years, things have been slipping back actually a little bit in that respect. That's maybe just anecdotal, but I'm not sure actually things are still heading in the right direction that way. And then lastly, on funding, you know, ultimately it is just up to us to persuade people with who are in charge of philanthropic budgets that it's our problems as opposed to other problems that are worth fixing. And you know, everybody who's relied on MacArthur Foundation money in the past has you know, gone through the various stages of grief that they've left the field, but ultimately they took that decision because they felt that they were getting diminishing returns for doing it. So, you know, ultimately it's our problem to make the case that we're worth paying for.
Thank you so much, Matt. Gokar, I'll come to you just for the final remarks, please. And after that, I would like to open this to questions from the audience, if there are any, and just bear in mind there might be some time at the end to in the final section to perhaps pick up on some of the points that were not developed or need to be developed further. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe a bit of an optimistic look at the field, but since I got in, which was during the Bush administration, I feel there's been quite a bit of diversification in the field, not just in terms of we have more women on panels, but in terms of the topics that are seen as acceptable to research, to discuss, to really be taken seriously. When I started out, disarmament was the big thing. You know, the whole, you know, studying non-proliferation as a rogue nation problem and all that. And since then, we've seen quite a bit more topics coming in and discussed and discussed in an academic setting and diplomatic setting, including the gender, including the colonialism and the nuclear weapons issue and some others. So that I think has been a positive development. There are a lot more young people in the field, and I think just because of the way the communications changed in the past decade and a half, I think they do get more opportunities for interaction, for exposure, for really getting their voices out there. So I think that's also a positive. Now, I think, yes, we are looking at the dangers of sliding back again because of this refocusing on the value of nuclear weapons. And also there's a bit of a danger of the tokenization of some of these issues. That's exactly what's been touched upon in terms of just turning this into a counting women on panels exercise rather than looking at the deeper interaction between feminism and the nuclear weapons issue. So I'll just stop there now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do share your reflections, and thank you for also leaving it on a more positive note, despite, you know, the difficulties that we all know persist. So I would like to open the floor for questions. And Paul, I can see you have a question. So would you like to raise it?
Well, it's a question and a big comment, which is that it seemed to me that this it's been a worthwhile discussion, but it's overlooking a rather huge possibility, which is curious, but maybe it's applicable for academics to overlook, that this is living through this war is living through a major inflection point in managing nuclear weapons. If we're talking about future nuclear order, we haven't looked at how profoundly the nuclear behavior over the Ukraine crisis has done that. I saw Andrew Futter had a poster up about the third nuclear age. Well, I thought we were there already, but maybe now we're in the fourth nuclear age. This is as big a jolt as the Cuban Missile Crisis to expectations. I would read this as saying that much of the accepted nuclear narrative about how we are to move into a better and less dangerous world has been seriously questioned, perhaps demolished. It is no longer believable that nuclear weapon states will. And I'm not just sneering at Russia here, though. I think Russia has to come severely under question. They are not behaving, and there is no international means or will to make them behave as they had undertaken to do. P5 members and signers of promises about never conducting nuclear war, negative security assurances, all of that, it is no longer believable. Now, states don't want to say this because there are reputational and diplomatic risks in admitting they no longer believe this. But my strong impression, partly through contact with nuclear states and officials and practitioners, is that that is what is happening. And I don't get any acknowledgement of that or any significant or adequate acknowledgement of that. This is a huge problem for the world and for academia. The ability to look at how we try and devise some and reclaim some believable narrative about how weapons are to be controlled or reduced, given what we know about the intractable unreliability of international society, the weakness of international institutions, the inability to count on global criticism for even the most egregious breaches of what we thought were well-established taboos. This is huge, isn't it? But I don't hear it being commented on very much. There may be reasons for this. It's uncomfortable. It prejudices academic reputations and funding streams. But I also recommend you to Constance Steinselmüller's recent essay on the return of the enemy, that we may be cognitively and emotionally unable to deal with the problem represented by Russia's nuclear, but particularly accentuated and very serious nuclear saber rattling, more than any previous signaling in this crisis. As a community, if this is an academic community, it ought surely to be looking at itself and why it's unable to rise to this challenge of how different this is and how it's not like previous signaling. I can understand why the Chinese would see it that way, and I can see the tendency to whataboutism. But I do repeat, nuclear practitioners in real nuclear ministries, as far as I'm in contact with them, really do see this as a serious rupture in the continuity of nuclear history. And it would be nice if this was acknowledged here, or logically dismissed. If you don't think that's true, please explain why you don't.
Paul, could you please proceed with a question to participants? Because I'm just mindful of the time.
Please explain to me how you judge the seriousness of the nuclear moment and what it means for the future, and how that should be reflected in the study agenda of the nuclear academic community.
Thank you so much, Paul. Anybody want to come in with any thoughts?
I feel like Matt answered that question in his intervention about that we don't ask enough what happens after the weapons use, which that's not. And that it ought to be much bigger part of the research and thinking. And there's just a critical shortage of people who are able to look into it and to comment on it in material terms. I'm not trying to channel Matt right now, but that was sort of my understanding of what he was talking, and that reflects the seriousness of the situation, because we should be looking at the possibility of nuclear weapons use differently than sort of the day before the war. I think Matt was sort of addressing that.
And just to say, my question was bigger than what happens if nuclear weapons are used. It's how do we manage in the nuclear future, even if they're not used, but they might be, and we suspect there are no reliable inhibitions on their use or acquisition.
Paul, this question, to be honest, I mean, I also raised the question of nuclear taboo. To me, this question is actually addressed in much larger terms, where we, like, for example, Steve Walt here at Harvard has been looking a lot about, the shift in the balance of power. Yeah. But this is the nuclear weapon use needs to be understood in much larger geopolitical issues, right? The issue of the decline of democracy, the question of the future of global governance, right? The fragmentation of these institutions and dialogues. And so this is where, in my view, and that to me is a very important missing element in the nuclear conversation, is that we are missing the big grand strategists at the table, right? And we missed also the military strategists. They understand, how do you fight conventional wars and what actually means, right, for nuclear escalation. So I think what you're pointing out is that the limitation of continuing to understand this war as in the nuclear element is not taking us very far. And so we needed at the table really these big thinkers. I was having a conversation with Graham Allison the other day here at Harvard, and Graham and I were trying to put together, for example, a new conversation about, are we shifting towards a multipolar world or a bipolar world, and what does it actually mean? Are we going to have blocks? Are we going to have networks or rivalries? So that to me is what you're perceiving as a narrowness in our field, which I think is true. I think we need to engage much more with the grand strategy question and really the future of world order.
And shouldn't you be? I mean, am I expecting too much that a self-constituted group of nuclear academics should look at those things, including, incidentally, the three-body problem and the implications of the huge Chinese nuclear proliferation? It's not possible intellectually, is it, to go on talking about the NPT bargain as inevitable, as a righteous belief that everyone should chant?
I'm not sure.
Jane, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think anyone does see the NPT bargain as inevitable.
That's
But
what
a
you
lot
have
of
to say in
people,
diplomatic fora.
but we're not diplomats, right? Nobody here is working for a government. I mean, I personally, I do put some stock in trying to uphold and bolster the NPT because it is what we've got and because states have signed up to it. And in the current system, I don't think we're going to get something better. But I think it's the proponents of the NPT regime that are on the back foot, which is a great pity. I think the TPNW community is not surprised by nuclear weapons being threatened, because what the TPNW advocates generally say is, nuclear weapons are going to be used at some point. We can't rely on taboos and kind of self-policing, so we have to get rid of the weapons. That is the only way to ensure that they're not used. And I think also, if you are a realist, deterrence is still working in terms of, Russia is not going to do, I assume, what Karaganov and the other eccentric commentators are suggesting and launch a preemptive attack on NATO. But it's the negative security assurances that are most at risk. It's the thought that actually, why don't we use what we've been building up against a country that can't directly fight back? And we will assume that other nuclear weapons countries will be so afraid of the hell of an all-out nuclear war that they won't retaliate with nuclear weapons. So it does leave a massive problem for the NPT. And for the whole proliferation bargain. But I think many academics have been critiquing that bargain and critiquing the NPT for quite a long time now. But there is a big question about what else is desirable. How do you square the big gap between the possible and the desirable at this point?
Can I sort of intervene a little bit here? I can see that we've got couple of hands raised, and I know I feel I don't want to stop the discussion, but I'm mindful of time, and there is one last section that I would like us to address. So it might be that this conversation comes around again, but I'm sort of going to use the co-conveners hat and just sort of step in and say, can we sort of pull this back to the agenda a little bit? Luba, was there anything that you wanted to say to round off the panel, and anything that anyone has a burning urge to say? Otherwise, let's move forward. Is there anything, Luba, you wanted to say?
We can proceed, but I just wanted to thank our wonderful participants for their comments and their reflections. I have like 4 pages of notes and research questions and funding ideas, and I think this is really helpful. While there's clearly a lot of tensions and a lot of worries, there are some positives here to also highlight, and there's some avenues and some opportunities that have been presented to us today. And I just want to thank everyone for this and thank you for your time. And I think it would be really helpful for early and mid-career, for anybody really who's interested in the field. And I personally really found some thought-provoking ideas here, and there's a lot to implement here as well. And we could do better, but we also are already doing quite well. So I think it's been a fantastic discussion. So I really thank you so much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be present here today.
Yeah, I just echo that. Thank you very much, and thank you, Luba, as well. Brilliant. Okay, so this takes us to the last question, and I wanted to allow a bit of time for this because it might be that some of the points we've raised get picked up again or pulled around, but this was something that Nicola and I felt that we really wanted to think about is what would you want to study or build a program around on nuclear issues if money were no object? So what I'd like to do is I think just open that out first to the panelists, and then open that out to anybody else who's here who would like to say a few words. So Paul, it might be that you have some thoughts, but just to sort of open it out to the panelists to wrap things off. If money was no object, what would you want to study or build a program around? Anyone? Yes, sir.
Hi. For me, it would be this question of the climatic impacts of nuclear weapons. And Benoit made reference to that earlier, talking about nuclear winter. And I think winter is an older term, and it seems to me that there's a sort of slightly broader spectrum of possible impacts than just a sort of either normal world or a world under a nuclear winter. And I would think probably more in terms of something like the planetary boundaries framework that I think Benoit also mentioned, which it sets out 9 different ways that humans sort of impact the planet and how we are exceeding, I think at the moment, 6 of them, beyond safe limits. The reason I say this is because it strikes me that there's fundamentally that might answer whether the use of nuclear weapons by one state would be something that might have some military utility versus something that would be sort of deliberately self-defeating, because the knock-on impacts in the days, weeks, months, and years afterwards would actually come back to haunt them. And so there is research on this. I mean, I think Benoit overstated the case slightly insofar as there's a small number of academics in the US who have been doing work on this, largely all kind of collaborating very closely. So having more researchers doing that work independently would be a good thing. And then there's a team affiliated most closely with Los Alamos, although including academics outside of the lab, who've published, I think, one paper that presents the counter argument, and then they're sort of gearing up to publish another one later this year. So that demonstrates that clearly there's debate to be had, and some kind of multidisciplinary, multi-state backed effort to really determine what the impacts of nuclear weapons use would be on the environment, I think would be such a useful thing. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Anybody else, any thoughts? Doreen, and then Paul.
Yeah, I can add a few more things here. Going along with this research on nuclear winter, I think it would be really helpful to require everyone in the field to sort of read up on the humanitarian and environmental effects of nuclear weapons. I think for those of us working in the field and dealing with these issues day to day, we can lose sight of what we're actually talking about when we talk about nuclear weapons, and often lose sight of their effects. So I think just funding exposure to those harmed by nuclear weapons use and production or nuclear testing would be helpful. I think research on whether we can transfer knowledge to the next generation without indoctrination of those younger scholars would be really helpful. I think it could be so interesting to look at where people studies and had fellowship, and when they went through programs in the past, whether they picked up certain topics or certain views but also like how we can prevent any of this indoctrination and how we can bring younger generations through different graduate programs and fellowships without indoctrinating them. And lastly, I think the field is still very much closed off to a lot of younger folks who don't have the resources to fund like a master or something. And I think just, yeah, providing more opportunities to level the playing field, but also paying like entry-level employees and interns well enough to stay in the field is something we just don't have the funds for, and I wish we did, but yeah, my 2 cents.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. That's something that we tend to overlook. Sort of, yeah, if you can't afford the fees to study, we're still losing some really good talent and some really interesting people. And this can also address sort of the wider, when we talk about gender and we talk about diversity in the field, the two have to be linked. You consider how much money was poured in during the Cold War for different issues and different types of studies, and then you look at the challenges that we face now. So really good point. Thank you, Doreen. Paul. And then Lise.
I don't, thank God, have a department to fund, so I don't know what I would specifically recommend on sources of funding. But I do think that while, to the extent that the academic community is unwilling or unable to provide ideas and research agendas which can be utilized in the political military considerations of nuclear weapon states, and maybe perhaps particularly the P3, but ideally all the nuclear weapon states, while that kind of distaste or indifference to actionable proposals continues, you will not expect much money from those sources. But it would be, and I repeat my earlier point this morning, that there must be a field of academic study which could come up with ideas of wider applicability about repairing the nuclear order, which are realistic in terms of the agendas of states and alliances, and that is the most pressing intellectual task, isn't it? How do we repair the damage to international trust and credibility of any international project of this dimension created by the Ukraine war? Not to think about that is to miss the main challenge of our times, I think.
Great, I agree. Thank you, Paul. Okay, Reese, anything that you'd like to add?
Sorry, I didn't want to keep you too long. Just the point I made in the chat, just concerning how far do you all think you're willing to take this? Because I've been investigating perhaps more, well, you go from reformist to radical solutions to nuclear disarmament. I've been looking at this kind of very obscure solution, just the world government solution to disarmament. I know this is something that we all sort of maybe have a knee-jerk reaction to, but I think it is worth just look into a little bit, and hopefully I can develop it a bit further. There's quite a lot there, and of course, hopefully you all know about the Baruch plan straight after the Second World War, and Einstein and Oppenheimer really did advocate for this straight after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think, again, we can relate it to existential risk as well. So I think I've got this idea of, yeah, just nuclear risk and how far are you actually willing to take it. Are we going to just have this discourse about status quo deterrence? I know all of you, take this further. Perhaps this is more of a US discourse thing, really, but it's really something I've started to think about. I'd be curious to see what you all think.
Right, Reese, is that the topic that you're doing your PhD on, or is that a different?
Yes, it is indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, interested to see how your research is going to develop. Great. So anything else from anyone else? No, well, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. I think there's a lot that's been discussed this morning, more actually than Nicola and I were anticipating, which is great. You start with an idea and it sort of develops, and it's really nice to have had everyone's feedback and contribution. We will put a copy of this recording on the GNO site. And if anyone has any questions or queries, please contact us. And there's also a few bits of follow-up from today that I will try and post as well. So again, if anyone wants me to share any information, then please let me know. I just think then we're actually doing brilliantly. We've got 3 minutes, which is rare for a workshop. Normally you're right at the end and you're like squeezing in. So anything anyone wants to say, or do you think we're all done? I think that wraps it up then. So a massive thank you to Luba, who stepped in to help us at the last minute and did a brilliant job. And a big thank you to everyone that's here. And I hope that we have another opportunity to meet again soon. So thank you. Have a lovely afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.